All right, so real quick, before we get into the actual content of this video, I have a quick question for the frequent viewers of this channel, subscribers, commenters, all of that. Obviously, I don't think it's any secret that over the last year or so, the growth trajectory of this channel has not exactly been great. We've been virtually stagnant for a while now, and I don't know how much of that is the YouTube algorithm or how much of it is the lack of quality or the quantity of videos that I am outputting, but I think that something needs to change. And so I want to get your guys' opinion in terms of what you think the future of this channel should be. Should I branch more into doing streams on a very consistent basis? Should I branch into doing, instead of 1 to 2 segments a day, maybe doing, 1 to 2 per week that are longer form and scripted and more highly edited on topics that I think are very important for that week? Give me your ideas in terms of what you think would be beneficial for this channel, for the community as a whole. Right? Because I don't want to just continue spinning my wheels in the same place and not really getting anywhere. So with that being said, let's go ahead and get into what I got for you guys today. So here we have, as pointed out here by Mags Naidu, right? A group of South African lawyers have written to the US president warning his government that they intend on instituting proceedings against them for being complicit in the ongoing international crimes perpetrated by Israel against the people of Palestine. So this has a connection with the International Court of Justice, where South Africa is bringing a genocide case against the government of Israel for perpetrating a genocide against the Palestinian people. And we're going to watch a couple of different reactions to exactly what this means here, both from Norm Finkelstein as well as from Francis Boyle, who is one of the only people in history to have brought a successful genocide case at this specific ICJ court. And we're going to hear from both of their takes. They have different various takes on this. Norm seems to think that this, isn't going to be successful at the ICJ, and Francis thinks it is going to be successful at the ICJ. So I think both of their perspectives are interesting. But I mean, just at the baseline here, if Israel is found to be complicit in genocide of Palestinians in Gaza, given their maximalist sort of blockade of the Gaza Strip and the cutting off of electricity and fuel and water and food and medical supplies from getting into Gaza, as they are bombing the absolute shit out of the Gaza Strip and killing upwards of 80-90% innocent civilians in their bombing campaign and their invasion, if they are to be found guilty of perpetuating genocide, then the United States of America, U.S. officials like Joe Biden, like Lloyd Austin, like Anthony Blinken as our top representatives, they would also be held complicit in that genocide. And so I think this is an interesting component to it, and I think that this is why you've seen people like John Kirby and Anthony Blinken and the rest of them come out and repeatedly say this genocide accusation has absolutely no merit, no basis in fact whatsoever. Right? Because I think they know at the end of the day that if they are found to be complicit in this in an international body that is recognized by, governments that are parties to the United Nations, then they would also be complicit because we are sending them weapons, we are giving them the aid, the support, the ammunitions to go and carry out this genocide, right? So I think that this has really serious, implications here. And so let's go ahead and jump into the Norm Finkelstein analysis, right? Now it's important to recognize this genocide case that South Africa is bringing against Israel. The entirety of it is not going to be resolved in like the next couple of weeks or months. It may take years and years and years for this entire process to play out, for a determination to be definitively made whether or not Israel is guilty of, committing a genocide against the Palestinians in Gaza. However, the most important key aspect of this is that they could get a temporary injunction as a part of this genocide case to say, even if the judges determine that there is a plausible case to be made that Israel may be committing genocide, then they can issue an injunction to say Israel has to stop their actions in Gaza, okay, until this resolution is inevitably resolved, right? And that has a bunch of other tangential implications that are associated with it, because then you could have, massive amounts of international pressure, whether it's political or diplomatic or economic pressure that is put on Israel to end the ongoing offensive into Gaza that is killing vastly disproportionately innocent men, women, and children, right? So it is important in terms of what could happen over the next week or so as a result of a temporary injunction on their actions in Gaza. And so with that being said, let's go ahead and jump in to what Norm Finkelstein has to say about what he thinks is going to happen. Basically that he thinks the court, the International, Court of Justice, is basically rigged in favor of Israel. So let's watch a little bit of this interview he did here with Katie Halpert.
So that's their demand. It was very well done. So on the merits, I would say they make a plausible case. But these things are never decided by the merits. They're not decided by the law. They're decided by politics. You can't get around it. And so what do you have now? The ICJ consists of 15 judges. The 15 judges comprise the Security Council and 10 other states. So Russia, China, the US, the UK, and France. Okay? The 5 permanent members, they have representatives on the ICJ. So you think to yourself, oh, great. Okay, we lose with the US for sure. We lose with the UK for sure. France is a question mark, given the statements it's been making about what's going on in Gaza. I would call it a question mark. And then we say, oh, great.
So some of the statements that he's, referencing here in regards to France is that, as far as I've seen, French representatives have come out and said that basically they will abide by whatever judgment is made by the ICJ. Now, obviously, they're a member of this, judicial body that is going to have influence over the inevitable decision that is made here. So whether or not they come out on the side of Israel or the side of Palestinians in Gaza, again, it's a question mark. It's basically 50-50, as he puts it there. But it seems like they're much more inclined to side against Israel than, say, the United States or Israel, right?
We have one question mark, then we have Russia and China. And you think, okay, we have Russia and China on our side. Well, Russia is now being accused of genocide in Ukraine. And that's a pending case in the ICC, the International Criminal Court. So do they want to open up the Pandora's box of that genocide convention, which might backfire and be used against them? Very unlikely. China. Well, as everybody knows, China is being accused of genocide against the Uyghurs. So do they want to open up the Pandora's box of the genocide convention and it's used against them? I would say very unlikely. So right now we have 1 of 5, which is France, maybe. Right. Then Germany's on this year.
Forget it. They'd vote for it. But they'd be worse than Israel on it.
They would vote for the genocide.
Yeah.
We agree it's genocide, but we're for it.
Right, exactly.
Which is incredibly depressing in a lot of different ways, right? The internal authoritarian crackdown that we've seen inside of Germany over the last couple of months since October 7th and even before that, which basically is the Germans, to a large degree, at least the German government, feels guilty for the Holocaust, which their government was responsible for, right? And so instead of taking the lesson from the Holocaust of never again, meaning never again, not just for Jewish people, but for any people who may be subjected to genocide, instead of going about that principled approach to it, the German government is basically saying, we are going to give a complete free pass to anything that Israel wants to do, even if that means them committing a genocide against the Palestinian people because of what we were responsible for during the Holocaust against the Jewish people, right? Which is such a perversion of the lessons that were supposed to be learned from the Holocaust, but that is exactly what Germany has been doing. And they've had internal, domestic, authoritarian crackdowns on, one of the most recent stories that I saw is that, the government gives out massive amounts of grants to artists within Germany, and they're having them, being forced to sign on in order to get some of those grants to sign on to this definition of anti-Semitism that basically includes any critique of the government of Israel. So incredible amounts of crackdowns within Germany, and just this response that completely ignores the actual real historical lessons from the Holocaust, which should be that this should never happen again to anybody. Genocide should be something that you, as the perpetrators, the previous historical perpetrators of genocide, should be forcefully standing against in any context, regardless of which ethnic group or which country is the perpetrator of said genocide. But yet, we have Germany, who is, almost even guaranteed more so than the United States, going to vote against this South Africa genocide case.
Then Uganda, which always votes with Israel, don't ask me why, it's on. So we have 4 probably will not vote for its plausibility. Then Germany, then Uganda. So that's 6. Morocco is on. Morocco will vote, I think, yes. it's a plausible case, and a few others. It'll be very tough. They need 8 votes. They need 8 votes. If you want to bring it up now, are you in front of a screen?
Yeah.
So just go International Court of Justice, judges today, and we'll see which countries are up there. Current members. So America, forget, hopeless cause. Russian, I would say unlikely. Slovakia, maybe a yes. Slovakia, France, I would say 50-50. So we have 2. Morocco, I say a yes. So we have 3. Somalia, probably a yes. That will be 4. China, probably a no or an abstention. Uganda, a no. India, well, since Modi is committing genocide against Muslims,
Right.
I would say a no.
And he's close with Netanyahu.
Right. Jamaica, maybe a yes. Maybe a yes. Lebanon, a yes. Japan is so terrified of the United States, I would call it a no. Germany, I would call a no. Australia, no. Brazil, definitely a yes.
Oh,
So I
you got 7?
I got 6.5 because we don't know
6.5.
about France.
Okay.
I would get 7. That would be my guess.
Yeah. All we need is 1 to flip to reach 8.
Okay, so that's the case against the South Africa genocide case against Israel succeeding at the International Court of Justice. Now, basically what this amounts to is which countries have the closest diplomatic and political and economic ties to Israel, right? None of what we just covered, whether it's France being sort of like a 50-50, whether it's the United States, whether it's Germany, whether it's, the United Kingdom or Russia or China, it seems like their decisions are made based on their own personal, political calculations, whether it's the United States being a geopolitical ally of Israel and seeing them as sort of like the 51st state or as a, an unsinkable aircraft carrier in the Middle East and a vitally important geopolitical region for the United States to maintain our hegemonic dominance over the global economy, militarily and otherwise, right? Whatever the reasons may be, it seems like these countries are inevitably going to make decisions not based on the actual merits of the case that South Africa has brought forward here, but rather based on like political calculations. And we saw this with the reporting that I talked about a couple of days ago with Israel trying to apply pressure on various countries around the world to denounce the South Africa genocide case against them for political reasons, not again for the merits of the case, but just for political reasons. And so we'll have to see how this plays out. I mean, we're cutting it very close there. As Norm Finkelstein was saying, you need about 8 votes, right? And we're hovering at around 6.5, maybe 7 if you include France in that being a yes. So it kind of just comes down to like, is one of these countries going to flip? Is one of these countries going to think that the case is so convincing, that the case is so black and white and transparent that you cannot rule against it, right? So previously, before seeing Norm Finkelstein's take, and Norm is somebody who his opinion is something I value very highly when it comes to this issue of Israel and Palestine, I'm becoming less and less convinced that this is something that is going to be successful. Now, granted, we do have people on the other side of that who are arguing that this is going to be successful. Here we have Francis Boyle, who recently did an interview on Democracy Now! With Amy Goodman, this is one of the guys who is one of the only human beings on the face of the planet who has successfully brought forward a genocide case at the International Court of Justice against Yugoslavia in this case. And he basically came forward and said that he thinks that South Africa will win an order against Israel. And so, at the same time, it's like I very much respect what Norm Finkelstein's opinion is on this. You also have somebody like Francis Boyle. He knows what he's talking about when it comes to winning genocide cases in front of the International Court of Justice. And so it's kind of up in the air at this point. Previously, I would have said, because I think I was basing a lot of what I was saying on the actual merits of the case that I've read, of the 84 or some odd page indictment that South Africa has brought against Israel. On the merits of the case, to me, it's 100%, right? But then you have to take in all of these other political calculations that these various influential countries are going to have on how this proceeding takes place. Now, again, you don't need necessarily for Israel to be convicted of genocide immediately. You need an initial immediate injunction to be ruled such that Israel, there's plausible evidence that they could be committing a genocide to try to pressure them to stop their offensive into Gaza as they are currently conducting it. And that's the key part there, because that is what is going to inevitably allow for the international community to apply much more pressure economically, diplomatically, politically, the rest of it, in order to try to get them to stop the aggressive genocidal nature of what they are currently perpetrating inside of Gaza and the West Bank for that matter. And so we also had this article that was released by Haaretz that I thought had some interesting components to it. It's called Israel and South Africa Trade Barbs on the Eve of Genocide Case at the UN's Top Court. So this is literally going to be happening over the next couple of days here, right? And so I'll link this down below if you want to go read the entirety of it. But essentially, some of the most, impactful things that I took from this article, they say the politically charged hearings will deal exclusively with South Africa's request for emergency measures ordering Israel to suspend its military actions in Gaza while the court hears the merits of the case, a process which could take years. Now, again, like the United Nations, the International Court of Justice, they don't have a military. They can't force Israel to stop what they're doing, with military might, but they can allow for a premise to be laid for other countries around the world to apply pressure onto Israel, right? Which is important because this is how, South African apartheid was ended. It was because of BDS, it was because of boycott, divestment, sanction, etc. That movement that allowed for international pressure to weigh on the government of South Africa during their apartheid era, to cripple their economy, to force them to change what they were doing. And so that same strategy needs to be put onto Israel in order for this kind of strategy to be effective. And this kind of a ruling from an international body that Israel is a signatory of, that South Africa is a signatory of, that, all of these various countries around the world are signatories of because they are members of the United Nations, this is something that should and could be very influential. But they also say, quote, here from the South African president, our opposition to the ongoing slaughter of the people of Gaza has driven us as a country to approach the ICJ. As a people who once tasted the bitter fruits of dispossession, discrimination, racism, and state-sponsored violence, we are clear that we will stand on the right side of history. And I mean, keep in mind, even people like, Tutu, and even people like, Nelson Mandela, they came out and they said, even once the South African apartheid had been, initially dismantled, right? Obviously, there were issues after the initial dismantling of South African apartheid, but even Nelson Mandela basically came out and said, our freedom will not be 100% unless we address the issue of Israel and Palestine, right? Palestinians deserve freedom in the same way that the South Africans deserved freedom, the black South Africans deserved freedom when they were trying to fight against apartheid. And so these are interconnected struggles, not just in the sense of Nelson Mandela's previous statements, also because Israel was a, participatory actor, and as well as the United States, in trying to prop up South African apartheid. But these are connected struggles, right? And many people have made the argument that Israeli apartheid is much more aggressive and much more brutal than even South African apartheid was at the time. And so they continue saying the Israeli government spokesperson Elion Levy said on Wednesday that, quote, and this is amazing here, the state of Israel will appear before the International Court of Justice to dispel South Africa's absurd blood libel, as Pretoria gives political and legal cover to the Hamas rapist regime. Okay, so bringing a genocide case against a country that is killing upwards of 90 or more % civilians in their onslaught, that have killed over 11,000 children, that have bombed mosques and schools and UN shelters and refugee camps and slaughtered journalists at an unprecedented scale in modern history, right? Bringing a genocide case against a country that whose representatives of the Knesset, of the Benjamin Netanyahu government, have openly said that their goal is to forcefully expel the Palestinian population inside of Gaza into the Sinai Peninsula or into other countries around the world. To bring a genocide case against them is blood libel. I mean, just absolutely ridiculous arguments here, right? Oh, they're giving legal cover to the Hamas rapist regime, right? To challenge a country on genocide is to be in support of everything that Hamas has ever done, right? I mean, what an absurd case. But they say on October 7th, Hamas committed an act of genocide when it sent death squads to invade Israel with the mission of burning, beheading, torturing, mutilating, abducting, and raping as many Israelis as they could, as brutally as they could. He continued, it was a campaign of systematic extermination that they have vowed to continue until our country is destroyed. We are fighting to bring the October 7th monsters to justice because never again is now. And I think that that's what this really comes down to, right? Does never again, this term that was taken after the Holocaust, right? That, this kind of an extermination of a group of people, an ethnic group of people, that it should never again be allowed to happen. Does this apply only to Jewish people, or does it apply to any group of people around the world who are subjected to genocidal campaigns against them? And in my opinion, it should apply to everybody. Right? Any group of people who are subjected to those kinds of conditions, this should be applied to. If the only lesson that we take from the Holocaust is that we shouldn't allow this to happen to Jewish people specifically, well, of course we shouldn't allow a genocide of Jewish people to happen again ever in the future of the world, obviously. But it has to apply to all different groups of people, right? And this ties back to what I was saying about Germany, because your country in history was responsible for perpetuating a genocide against the Jewish people. That does not mean that you then get a justification to support a genocide against a different group of people, right? That's not how this shit works. And granted, Hamas committed atrocities against Israeli civilians on October 7th. That's absolutely guaranteed. Now, there have been some stories like the 40 beheaded babies that were later proven to be false, of course, but there were war crimes that were committed on October 7th by Hamas against Israeli civilians. But if you accept that, if you are principled in your stance against war crimes, and in your stance against human rights abuses, right, as I believe that I am, then you should be able to condemn those war crimes that were committed by Hamas on October 7th, and then also apply the same standard to the country of Israel, which has slaughtered not only in pure absolute numbers far more civilians inside of Gaza since October 7th, but also as a percentage, they have killed more civilians than Hamas did when they attacked Israel on October 7th and killed roughly about a 50-50 split between civilians and between, militants that they attacked inside of military bases in southern Israel, right? You should be able to apply this across the board. And yet, they're using this kind of an argument to say that Hamas is guilty of genocide, which, they're obviously at the baseline level not even capable of committing, right? Even if you want to make the argument that Hamas has genocidal ambitions of Israelis, right? If you want to make that argument, they do not have the capabilities to do that. They're not even a real organized, fully fledged, military apparatus, right? That is why Israel was able to conduct a months-long bombing campaign to completely flatten the north of Gaza, right? To destroy all of the housing, the infrastructure, civilian life that existed within the north of Gaza. That's because they have not only the intention to commit a genocide of the Palestinians in Gaza, but the ability to commit a genocide of the Palestinians in Gaza. And that's an important point, I think, to make. And so we move on now here to Anthony Blinken, right? Who I think reasonably, if international law means anything whatsoever, would also be complicit in Israeli genocide against Palestinians. So of course he came out, he joined John Kirby in saying that this South Africa case is meritless, it's a distraction from ongoing humanitarian efforts. Jesus Christ, man. 1 minute later, Blinken cites the United Nations warning that 90% of the people in Gaza are dangerously food insecure. I don't think I've ever seen somebody do, a self-admission here this quickly and a 180 like this, right? 90% of Gazan people are dangerously food insecure, according to the United Nations. Why are they food insecure? Well, it's because of the Israeli blockade. It's because of stories like I covered the other day, where Israel is intentionally being cumbersome, is intentionally being, is obfuscating in terms of the responsibility to allow humanitarian aid into Gaza, right? They're turning around trucks because it had a tent in it, that there was some small part of a tent pole that could hypothetically be used as a weapon in the future, right? This is the kind of logic that they are using to deny humanitarian aid into Gaza. But also the reason that they even need humanitarian aid in the first place is because of the Israeli onslaught, right? So to turn around and to say, oh, it's meritless, the South Africa genocide case is completely meritless, right? And as a reminder, we just talked about yesterday, right? The United States government has explicitly ignored, their responsibility to not sell weapons to countries that are committing human rights abuses or war crimes with those weapons. They're choosing not to do an actual formal look into whether or not Israel is following international law. They're not even looking at it. They're choosing not to do a formal assessment, right? So then to turn around and say the South Africa genocide case completely meritless, based on what? Based on what exactly? Do you have a counter argument? Do you have, facts that you could counter the facts that South Africa has put forward, the statements from Israeli politicians that South Africa has put forward? Do you have any counter whatsoever other than just, it's meritless, this is blood libel, this is anti-Semitism, it's ridiculous? They have no argument, right? So it'll be interesting to see what the exact arguments are from Israel in defense of themselves, right? I'm sure that they'll bring up a lot from October 7th and all of that stuff. But in terms of the South Africa case, that'll link down below, and we're going to get to here at the end of the video, but I'll link it down below. In terms of the actual facts of the case, there's no two ways about this. If you read the case that has been submitted, it's like 80 some odd pages, right? If you actually read the entirety of the case, it's pretty black and white. It's very difficult to argue against the fact that Israel has the intent and that they are conducting a mass genocide of the Palestinian people. At least that's their intention, right? We have other countries that have joined in this cause: Venezuela, Malaysia, Maldives, Bolivia, Nicaragua, Turkey. They've all stated their support for South Africa's case against Israel. We also had, of course, as I mentioned a couple days ago, Ofer Kasif, who is an Israeli politician who has joined to back South Africa's ICJ case against Israel. And then, again, I'll link this down below. Go read the entire thing and tell me that this is not a convincing case here, right? This is the application that South Africa admitted to make the genocide case at the International Court of Justice against the government of Israel. And I want to jump down here to a couple of different pages. If you go down to like page 59, it is here, right? These are just the statements of Israeli politicians, right? So you can look at the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, and he talks about striking our enemies with unprecedented might. He references the story of Amalek, where they talk about killing men, women, children, the camel, the ox, the sheep, etc., killing everything in their sight in sort of a revenge tour. You can talk about the president of Israel, Isaac Herzog, where he said it's an entire nation of people out there that are responsible. It's not true. This rhetoric of that civilians are not aware or not involved, it's absolutely not true. We will fight until we break their backbone. Talking about all innocent civilians in Gaza, right? In their mind, there is no innocent civilians in Gaza. Yoav Gallant, the Israeli Minister of Defense, we are imposing a complete siege on Gaza. No electricity, no food, no fuel, no water. Everything is closed. We are fighting human animals and we will act accordingly. That in and of itself is collective punishment. That is against international human rights law. Minister for National Security, Itamar Ben-Gvir, right? To be clear, when we say that we are destroying Hamas, it should mean those who celebrate, those who support, those who hand out candy, they're all terrorists. They should all be destroyed. He's referencing what he believes to be every civilian in Gaza. The Minister of Energy and Infrastructure, right? So these aren't just like random members of the Knesset. These are members of Benjamin Netanyahu's coalition, right? Minister of Energy and Infrastructure, he tweeted on October 13th, right? All the civilian population in Gaza is ordered to leave immediately. That's an ethnic cleansing. We will win. They will not receive a drop of water or a single battery until they leave the world. How else do you interpret that? How else do you interpret that other than genocidal, right? Humanitarian aid to Gaza, he says. No electrical switch will be turned on, no water hydrant will be opened, and no fuel truck will enter until the Israeli abductees are returned home. Humanitarianism for humanitarianism, no one will preach us morality, okay? So again, not a single drop of water will enter, okay, until they leave the world. That's what he said about the population in Gaza. Not Hamas militants who attacked on October 7th, the population of Gaza. That's a direct quote. The Minister of Finance, right? We need to deal a blow that hasn't been dealt in 50 years. There are a couple other heroes, right? Like on the Nakba, right? There was, I believe, here it is, the Minister of Agriculture, right? Avi Dichter, in a television interview, right? He says, we are now actually rolling out the Gaza Nakba. What else is there to look at here other than their own statements on what their goals are inside of the Gaza Strip, other than them being genocidal? I don't know how you could read all of these different statements from high-ranking government officials within Benjamin Netanyahu's coalition and come to any other conclusion than that is their goal. It is mass ethnic cleansing, to expel the Palestinian population from the Gaza Strip, push them into the Sinai Peninsula or other places around the world, and to resettle the Gaza Strip, which is something we saw from Bezalel Smotrich and Itamar Ben-Gvir. We've seen it from Benjamin Netanyahu, right? This is their goal. So the actual case that is being made here could almost entirely be made just with statements from Israeli politicians openly to the media, right? But then you have all of the other actual humanitarian crises on the ground. The mass starvation, the spread of disease. I covered a story a couple of days ago. 10 children losing limbs every single day inside of Gaza. Most of them having to have amputations without anesthesia because Israel is not allowing in adequate medical access, right? The lack of clean drinking water, the lack of food, or the lack of medical supplies, etc., etc., etc. The mass bombing campaigns, the targeting of journalists, the targeting of mosques and schools and UN shelters and refugee camps. All of this combines into beyond a convincing case for genocide. And so we'll have to see how this actually ends up playing out. I still tend to lean on the side that I do think that South Africa is going to win this initial injunction against Israel to, halt their hostilities inside of Gaza. And then we'll have to go from that position. But in terms of making a convincing case for genocide, it does not get more convincing than this.